It is a cold and blustery morning here, reminiscent of President Carter's inauguration about 50 years ago. When the service starts here at roughly 10 a.m., we're expecting about an hour and a half of songs, tributes, as you mentioned, of course, President Biden eulogizing Jimmy Carter. But we're also going to be hearing from a number of folks that were important to the former president. We just saw Andrew Young a few moments ago. Andrew Young will be one of the first speakers. It was, of course, Andrew Young, who was mayor of Atlanta, Georgia. But before that, it was Jimmy Carter who appointed Andrew Young as ambassador to the United Nations. He will be one of the early speakers. There will be a number of folks singing as well, including, we're told, Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood will be singing Imagine, one of President Carter's favorite songs. And after he leaves the National Cathedral, he will then be taken to Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. From there, he will be flown back to Plains, Georgia, where he will be laid to rest next to his wife, Rosalind Carter, wife of more than 70 years. She, of course, passed away back in November of 2023 as we watched the casket pulling up here outside the National Cathedral. Behind the hearse carrying the casket, of course, members of President Carter's family. His grandchildren today will be serving as pallbearers as well. Savannah, Lester.
All right, Craig, thanks. As we see that the crowd begin to form there, we will be seeing really decades and decades of history in the faces and, of course, the eulogies. And this is the scene again outside the cathedral where the former president's casket will soon enter for the beginning of this funeral. I want to bring in Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker, our senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson as well, and our senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, who's covered the former president for years. Kristen, let me begin with you. Your reflections here as the nation says goodbye.
Well, Lester and Savannah, I'm struck by the fact that you have all of the past presidents coming together, this rare show of bipartisanship to honor the life and legacy of the late Jimmy Carter, the 39th president of the United States, who, of course, served one term. He left after a defeat by Ronald Reagan. Inflation was high. There were American hostages in Iran. But his post-presidency, in some ways, I think, has become such a critical part of his legacy. His focus on human rights, his focus on community, the Carter Foundation building homes for those in need, fighting diseases, in fact, stomping out one disease throughout Africa, and really having that be a model of what he wanted to be remembered for. And he really made the presidency, by the way, a shift towards one that was focused on human rights globally. I think that will be a key part of the Carter legacy, as will, I think, the tone that he tried to set here in Washington. He didn't enjoy politics particularly, but he enjoyed policy. He understood the importance of it. So he is also known for the Camp David peace accords of 1978 between Egypt and Israel, which, by the way, still resonate to this day. I think we will hear President Biden, when he eulogizes Carter, talk about that, talk about his accomplishments both in and out of office, and the fact that he was someone who really tried to strike a note of decency throughout his political career. By the way, President Biden becoming the first senator to endorse him in 1976 when Carter ran for president. Back then, the two have a long friendship, a long relationship, at times disagreeing. And I think some of these past presidents would say they at times disagreed with his penchant for speaking out, for making his perspective known. One final point. I went back to the Meet the Press archives to get a sense of some of what Carter had to say on Meet the Press over the course of his 11 appearances. And in 2000, in an interview with Tim Russert, Mr. Russert asked him about civility in the age of 2000. And he talked about his campaign with the late Ronald Reagan, and he said it wasn't an accepted thing to run a negative campaign. For him, civility, decency, human rights were key. Lester, Savannah.
All right, let me bring in Hallie Jackson. Hallie, we talk so much about the post-presidency of Jimmy Carter, but can you reflect on how he treated politics after he left the White House, how he inserted himself, or maybe in some cases didn't insert himself in the political debates of the time?
He saw himself as somebody who would work on humanitarian causes, somebody who would work to promote peace around the world, somebody who in many ways had a post-presidency that, in the eyes of historians, was perhaps more productive than his presidency. Although I will tell you, when you talk with historians, with experts, with people close to him, they will tell you that's a bit of a misnomer. He did a lot as a president. He's known for so many of his works, like with Habitat for Humanity, after he left office. But at the same time, somebody like Walter Mondale, we'll hear from his son later on today, delivering a tribute this morning, talking about how history will judge Jimmy Carter differently in the decades after he leaves office than they did while he was in office, given how he left in 1980 with one of the lowest approval ratings for any president. You take a look at some of these images here, Lester, as we look at the Washington National Cathedral, and I'm struck by this moment of bipartisanship for Washington. We talk a lot about how that can sometimes be rare in a town like this, but we will start to see, and I'm looking closely here, I think the front rows are still empty there. You will see these former presidents filing in, different political parties. We've seen it even at the U.S. Capitol as President Carter has been laying in state there over the course of the last couple of days. Top Democrats, top Republicans coming together. You see former Vice President Mike Pence there. A notable moment, as we do expect to see President-elect Trump and Melania Trump here sitting very close to his former running mate now. The first time the two of them will come into this kind of close public contact since leaving office 4 years ago. And think about Jimmy Carter and bipartisanship. We talk about his time after leaving the White House. He became exceptionally close with Gerald Ford. We will hear from the former Gerald Ford's son later on today, delivering a tribute here. But Jimmy Carter talked about how one of the greatest blessings of his life was this friendship that he developed across the aisle, this bipartisan friendship that meant so much to him later in life. And so that, I think, is a theme and part of the tone that you will see at the Washington National Cathedral today, Lester.
Hey, thanks for watching. Don't miss the Today Show every weekday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 Pacific on our streaming channel, Today All Day. To watch, head to today.com/allday or click the link right here.